The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely upon advertisements.
Regardless of the type of mental illness we're trying to service connect for you, you will be sent to a compensation pension exam by a psychologist to determine your current disability, the impact it has on your ability to work, and whether it's service connected. Now that last part may be conceded already if you are already service connected for that mental illness. However, if this is your first time asking for compensation or you've been denied in the past for compensation for an illness, then the doctor will be asked to give an opinion as to whether the illness that they've just diagnosed is service connected. So what I'd like to do is walk you through a compensation pension exam by a psychologist. The first thing you need to understand about these examinations is that the psychologist is likely not going to question what you tell them about your experiences, unless it's patently absurd. If you go in there and you talk about seeing purple giraffes and rhinoceroses in Iraq, they're probably going to question whether that's true or not. However, if you're talking about a combat experience or something that happened in service, like a military sexual trauma, they're not going to sit there and overanalyze your records to determine if you're being honest or not. The VA and these doctors are going to assume what you experienced actually happened unless it could be proven to be untrue, just based on a very simple reading of the facts. So it's important that you're open and honest, knowing that what you're going to say is going to be seriously taken and evaluated. The second thing you need to know about these examinations is that the doctor is not going to sit there and read through all your medical records before meeting with you. They're going to do this they're going to get some stuff from the VA initially, like maybe 30 pages of records from your service or anything relevant from the VA or other doctors you've seen recently. But for the most part, they're going to treat you like a fresh patient. You're going to walk in, they're going to greet you, and they're going to get to know you as a person. There's 3 different parts of your life they're going to ask you about. And how they ask you about these parts of your life is going to depend on the examiner. Everyone has their own styles of questioning, but they are, regardless of their style, they're going to ask you about 3 parts. They're going to ask you about your childhood, they're going to ask you about your time in service, and they're going to ask you about your time after service. Why do they do this? Because again, if you're not already service connected for a condition, the examiner is going to try to determine whether the symptoms that you're dealing with now are because of something that happened in service or some other time in your life. For example, if you show up and you're trying to get depression service connected, and then you start talking to the examiner about all the times you were depressed and hospitalized as a child, the examiner is not going to be keen to saying that your condition is service connected because it's going to predate your time in service. On the other hand, if you go in there and talk about the first signs of depression occurred 3 years ago when something tragic happened in your life, then the examiner is going to think the symptoms post-dated service. When I talk to my clients, I tend to use the Goldilocks principle. Not too cold, not too hot, just right. And that's what we're trying to convince the examiner of when you meet with them. So when you're talking about your childhood, it's important you just hit on the high points. You don't need to go too much into detail if it was a typical childhood. Where you need to get really into detail, though, is what happened in service. Because the more detail you can give about what happened in service and what happened affected you, how it affected you, the more likely it is the examiner is going to think that was when everything started. So there's a few things about talking about what happened in service. Number one, you got to be honest, open, and go into detail. These are professionals. These are not amateurs they're sending you to. They are used to talking to people with all sorts of trauma. So your trauma is very personal to you, but this examiner is trained to analyze that trauma in a clinical sense. You're not going to upset them. You're not going to offend them. Just tell it how it is. But it's more important than just telling them what happened. The key to getting service connected is not only having that experience in service, but you have to explain to the examiner how that experience fundamentally changed you as a person. This is a story I like to tell some of my clients. I was a younger attorney and I met this he was a state judge out of Idaho. Amazing gentleman. This guy's a hero. This is a superhero, quite honestly. He was a Vietnam War era veteran, and what he did was he was in helicopters, going around and dropping troops off and going around, and he was the machine gunner on a helicopter. The life expectancy of someone in that position was less than a month. He did it for 3 years. And this man, later on, came back to the States, became an attorney, eventually became a Supreme Court justice. You talk to him, and that experience did not affect him. It was very traumatic. He lost pretty much everyone he worked with in the military, but it did not induce a lot of trauma on him because of just his makeup. Well, someone else in that position may have experienced things a lot differently than he did. They may have nightmares, they may have anxiety, they may have come back and started drinking because they couldn't cope with the memories. So it's not just the fact that something happened, but it's how you responded to that situation that's the most important in figuring out what diagnosis is best in your situation, but also whether that stress affected you so much that it should be compensated. So to summarize what I just said, it's important that you be honest about what you experienced, but you also have to be honest about how it changed you as a person. Common ways that it could have changed you is you started having nightmares because of the incident. Your performance dropped afterwards because of the incident. You may have started using drugs and alcohol. You may have started having panic attacks or isolating. There's a number of ways you may have reacted to what you experienced, but regardless of what it was or how that experience changed you, it's important you communicate it to the examiner. When you're talking about what happened after service, this is where I see most veterans have kind of the biggest hurdle, because what they'll do is they'll talk about what happened in service and how it changed them. And then when they talk about what's happening now, they talk about it with such vigor that the examiner is left questioning, well, hey, was it this incident in service 20 years ago? Or was it this thing that just happened 5 years ago that's causing you to talk so loud at me? So it's important when you're talking about what's happened since service to always relate it back to that experience you had that changed you. One way that I train my clients to talk is to say, hey, when you're talking about all these other things that have happened that you're not proud of after service, start off by saying, because of what I experienced in service, I haven't been able to hold a job. Because of what I experienced in service, every relationship I started ended poorly. Because of what happened in service, I can't get along with my coworkers. I blow up at them. Because of what happened in service, I have nightmares every night. I don't sleep more than 3 hours. Again, the facts will be different for everyone, but it's important to tie it back down to whatever's going on now, tie it back down to what happened in service. That you would not be the way you are if you didn't experience what you experienced in service. This will help the examiner make sure that they give you the most accurate diagnosis. But if you are not service connected for a condition already, when they're asked by the VA, hey, did something happen in service to cause them to have this diagnosis? Most examiners will look at your testimony to them and say, yeah, because of all these different ways it's impacted him, I believe that it goes back to what happened in service. If you have any questions about these exams, please give us a call. But if I had to summarize it in a couple of sentences, be honest and be open. The best you can do those two things, the more likely it is the examiner is going to see what happened to you as something critically that needs to be compensated by the military. Thank you.